Well, in this passage, Abimelech, the king, enters into a covenant with Abraham at a place called Beersheba. Abraham was a shepherd, and he was a nomad or a Bedouin, and so he moved around with his flocks to provide fresh pastures for his flocks. So he moved to the area of Beersheba. And Beersheba is a significant place in the Bible. Abraham lives there. Isaac lives there. Jacob lives there. Other people in the Bible we see at Beersheba, for example, in 1 Kings 19:3, Elijah the prophet flees to Beersheba. So it's a significant place. Several people have an experience with God at Beersheba in the Bible, so it's significant. Beersheba also marks the southern border of the Promised Land. The southern border of the Promised Land. You read in the Old Testament several times the phrase, from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is the northern boundary, and Beersheba is the southern boundary of the Promised Land. So to say from Dan to Beersheba would be like us saying from Maine to Florida, or from coast to coast, or sea to shining sea, kind of thing. It's the northern and southern boundary of the Promised Land. Here in verse 22, that we read that Abimelech and Phicol, Abimelech's commander of his army, they come to Abraham seeking a covenant or seeking a peace treaty with Abraham. Now, we've met Abimelech before. Back in chapter 20, Abimelech is the king of Gerar, and if you remember from chapter 20, Abraham deceived Abimelech. He lied to him. He lied about his wife, Sarah, saying that Sarah was his sister, and then Abimelech took Sarah to be his wife, thinking that she's not married. And that night the Lord appeared to Abimelech and spoke to Abimelech in a dream, warning him about Sarah, telling him that Sarah is indeed Abraham's wife. And then the next day, if you remember from chapter 20, Abimelech strongly rebuked Abraham and Sarah for deceiving him. And Abimelech, said, "What's your problem, man?" That's my paraphrase. But what did you do this for? What have I done to you that would cause you to do this to me? And he even said, you shouldn't do this to people. Abimelech, a heathen pagan king, rebuked Abraham. So Abraham's last encounter with Abimelech was not Abraham's greatest moment in his life. It was maybe his most embarrassing moment because he really failed. He was a bad witness for God before Abimelech, and Abimelech, a non-believer, called him out for his behavior. We all can be a bad witness for Christ, can't we? We can all blow it at times. We all do blow it at times. We act in the flesh. We all have our embarrassing moments that we're ashamed of, just like Abraham and Sarah. You probably have an Abimelech or two in your past that when you think about that person, you kind of cringe because you know what you did to them, you know how you treated them, you know how you behaved, you remember that last conversation and what they said to you. And we all have people in our minds right now that we hope we never bump into them in the grocery store because we're so embarrassed by our behavior. Well, that was kind of Abimelech for Abraham. But now, coming into chapter 21, now 4 years or more have passed since chapter 20. So if this was a movie about Abraham's life, the screen would go black, and it would say 4 years later. The screen would come up. And what has happened over that 4 years is over that time, it became evident to Abraham's neighbors that God was with Abraham and Sarah. And God was blessing them, and God was prospering them materially. And most importantly, God gave them a son, Isaac, truly a miracle baby for Abraham and Sarah at their ages. And so in verse 22, who shows up at Abraham's house? Look at what it says, verse 22. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech And Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. What a testimony. Abimelech has seen and heard about Abraham's life over the years since their encounter 4 years ago. He has seen and heard about Abraham's life over the years, and Abimelech, of all people, shows up and says, God is with you, Abraham. God is with you. I've watched your life. I can see, after watching your life for all these years, that I had you all wrong. What I thought about you was wrong. God is clearly with you. It's undeniable. And I love this because it shows us that people are watching your life. People are watching your life. They're observing you. And even though you may have blown it before them or wronged them in the past or been a bad witness for Christ, over time, you can show that God is with you. That God is with you. As you continue to follow Christ and live for God and walk in His ways, those people will realize that God is with you, and that thing that you did isn't really who you are. And they can see that by the testimony of your life, that God is with you, His goodness is on your life. As far as we know, Abraham never went back to Abimelech to try to defend his actions or try to explain what he did or try to defend himself. He never sent Abimelech a note or a card or an email. He didn't try to fix it because his actions were indefensible. So Abraham just kind of, let it go, and over time, Abimelech realized God was with Abraham. Listen, people from your past, they see your life in Christ. They see what God is doing in your life. They see the difference that Jesus Christ is making in you and making in your family over the years. They may never tell you that, but they see it. They see your witness, and it's a testimony to them. Just as you're living your life for Christ, and you're trying to honor God, and you're trying to walk in His ways, and you're trying to raise your family to honor God, people see that. They know who you were, they know what you were like, but they see what God is doing in your life and in your family. So look at verse 23. So Abimelech comes, he says, God is with you in all that you do. That's obvious. That's undeniable. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. Abimelech says to Abraham, swear to me that you will not deal falsely with me or with my children or with my grandchildren. Now, why does Abimelech say this to Abraham? Because Abraham had dealt falsely with him in the past. Abimelech knows that God is with Abraham and that God is prospering Abraham. But at the same time, he also knows that Abraham has a history of being deceptive. And so Abimelech seeks a covenant with Abraham to protect himself and to protect his family in the future. And that's what he's asking for in verse 23. And in verse 24, Abraham said, I will swear. And so Abraham agrees to enter into a covenant with Abimelech. And Abraham understood Abimelech's concern based on Abraham's past behavior. I mean, who could blame Abimelech here after his experience with Abraham in the past? And I think it's important to note that Abraham was not insulted by Abimelech's request. He didn't get defensive. He didn't say, how dare you insinuate that I would ever deal falsely with you? I'm offended you would make such a suggestion as this. You know, many people today get insulted at the smallest thing. It's just the culture that we live in today. They get insulted by everything, even if the thing is true. Even if it's based in fact, even if it's a legitimate thing. Abimelech's got good reason here to be concerned about Abraham dealing falsely. He's got a history. Even so, people today, they get outraged. Doesn't really seem to matter what the truth is. It doesn't really seem to matter what the facts are, what the history is. People still get outraged. But Abraham, he chose not to be hurt. He chose not to be insulted by Abimelech's request. You can choose just not to be insulted when there's really nothing to be insulted by. He said, sure, I'll swear, I'll make an oath. I'll enter a covenant with you.